My girlfriend was raped, got pregnant, and was manipulated by her religious mother. Now she's free, and I'm the baby killer villain in her family's eyes. I don't know when I first realized how heavy the silence between us had become. Maybe it was the first time I caught her staring blankly at the wall, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes empty. Maybe it was when the words that used to come so easily between us started to feel like a foreign language. Whatever the moment was, it marked the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for. A shift that felt so slow, so insidious, that it took me far too long to even recognize it for what it was. 2 months ago, my girlfriend, Emily, was raped. I don't even like saying it. It feels like the words are too small to carry the weight of the event, the weight of what it did to her. And yet, it's the truth. I was overseas at the time, doing a work project, and came back early when I found out. She didn't want to report it. She didn't want to go to the hospital. She barely wanted to speak to anyone, including me. I couldn't force her to do anything. All I could do was be there. Be present. And I tried. God, I tried. But I couldn't fix it. And that was the hardest part, seeing her in pieces and not knowing how to glue her back together. It wasn't just the rape that broke her, it was the aftermath. The terror that had clung to her like a shadow. The breakdowns. The desperate whispers about feeling worthless. I watched as she crumbled under the pressure of her own mind, and no matter how many times I told her I was here for her, how many times I reassured her that I loved her, it never seemed to be enough. Therapy was our lifeline, but even then, she didn't open up as she should. She couldn't. How do you talk about something like that when the world feels like it's crumbling around you? It wasn't until last week that things took another turn. The kind of turn I was afraid of but had never anticipated. We found out she was pregnant. I don't think I'll ever forget the moment she told me. We were sitting on the couch in the dim light of the evening, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She'd been quiet for a while, and I thought she might have been lost in her own thoughts, just like every other night. But when she spoke, her voice was thick with something I couldn't place, not at first. "I'm pregnant," she said, her eyes not meeting mine. "I'm sure, it's his." I froze. It was like the world stopped spinning for a moment. My stomach dropped. "His?" I whispered, even though I already knew the answer. There was no need to say it aloud, but I needed to hear it anyway. She nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The rapist. I'm sure it's his." I couldn't breathe. There were a million thoughts firing off in my head, each one faster than the last. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hold her, but I didn't know how to hold her through this. What did she want me to do? What did I want to do? After a long, suffocating silence, we had a conversation I'll never forget. It was painful. Raw. There were no easy answers. She wanted to keep it. I wanted her to abort. Her reasons were simple, at least from where she stood. The baby wasn't to blame. It was innocent, and despite everything that had happened, she couldn't bring herself to destroy it. I didn't know how to argue with her, and the more I thought about it, the more helpless I felt. She was devoutly Catholic. Her faith was everything to her. I knew the kind of struggle this would cause inside her, but I didn't think it was something I could live with. I just didn't. I can't raise a child from him," I told her, my voice tight. "I can't do it, Emily. I won't." She cried then, the kind of tears that make your heart break. "Please," she begged, voice trembling. "Please don't leave me. Not now." I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. But I couldn't. Not when the reality of the situation was staring me in the face like this. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me too. About what I could live with. "Either you keep the baby, and I leave, or you abort, and I stay," I said. My voice was colder than I meant it to be. But there it was, and I knew I had no choice but to stand by it. Her face twisted in agony, but she didn't argue. The words that followed were soft, pleading. But the decision had been made, and there was no going back. The days that followed were a blur. She didn't want either option, and yet, she chose to keep the baby. I left. The days after I left were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I tried to distract myself, work, friends, anything that could keep my mind from drifting back to her. But no matter how much I told myself that I'd made the right choice, the guilt was suffocating. I wasn't even sure if it was guilt for leaving her, or guilt for wanting to stay away. The truth was, every part of me screamed to go back. I loved her. I still loved her more than I could even explain. But I couldn't do this. I couldn't raise a child that wasn't mine. Couldn't raise a child that was born out of violence. I kept replaying our conversation in my head. The raw desperation in her voice. The way her hands trembled when she asked me not to leave. I couldn't get the image of her face out of my mind. The fear. The pain. I was so damn sure I was doing the right thing, but every minute that passed felt like a betrayal. I don't know how long I lasted before I cracked. A week? 2? It felt like an eternity. I thought I was done. I thought I had made peace with the decision, but the truth was, I couldn't breathe without her. Without her voice, without the way she smiled when we watched stupid movies together, without the way she held me when she needed comfort. There was no peace in my heart. Then, the call came. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring a cup of coffee, trying to numb my mind when my phone rang. I didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. Emily. I stared at the phone for a moment, the weight of it heavy in my hand. I thought about hanging up. I thought about continuing to walk away, pretending like I was fine, like everything was okay. But I wasn't fine. And everything wasn't okay. I answered. Please. Please just listen to me. Her voice cracked through the line, and I felt it deep in my chest. She was crying. God, she was crying. I need you. I closed my eyes, taking in a shaky breath. What is it, Em? I whispered, my voice betraying how much I was struggling. I talked to my mom, she said, her words coming out in a rush. I didn't know what to do, and I thought maybe she could help me decide. But she told me I couldn't abort. She said if I did, she would never speak to me again. She said if I killed the baby, I would be going to hell. I felt the floor fall out from beneath me. My stomach twisted, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't happening. She wasn't saying this. Wait. You didn't listen to her, did you? I asked, feeling the panic start to rise. My thoughts were spinning. I thought we had already decided. She had told me she couldn't do this alone. I don't know what to do anymore, she cried. I thought maybe I could do this on my own. But when she said all those things, I felt like I was losing everything. I felt like I was going to lose my mom and my faith, and I don't know what to do. The desperation in her voice hit me harder than any punch could. I hated her mother for doing this to her. I hated her for putting her own child through this torment. But I couldn't let Emily bear the weight of it alone. Listen to me, I said, my voice firm. You don't have to listen to anyone but yourself, okay? Not your mom, not anyone. This is your life. You have the right to decide what happens to your body, to your future. You hear me? I hear you, but it's not that simple, she whispered. Yeah, I know. But you're not alone, Em. I'm here. I'll be here. We talked for hours, and slowly, she started to open up again. She was torn between her love for me, her desire to move forward, and the suffocating grip of her mother's influence. She said she was scared of what would happen to her family if she went through with the abortion. Scared of losing everything that had once felt safe. But I wasn't going to let her drown in that fear alone. I'm not leaving you, I promised her. Not like this. You're stronger than you know. You get to choose. She broke down again, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just her tears of fear, it was relief. She had made a decision, one that was hers. She was going to go through with the abortion. I'm sorry, she said softly after a while. I'm sorry for everything. Don't apologize, I told her. You have nothing to apologize for. The weeks leading up to the abortion were nothing short of a nightmare. The weight of our decision sat between us like a ghost. But despite everything, the pressure, the fear, the pain, we somehow began to heal, even if it was in small, tentative steps. I went with her to the clinic. She was nervous, her hands shaking, but she was determined. She wasn't doing this for me, she wasn't doing this for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. In the sterile room, with its bright lights and faint smell of antiseptic, I held her hand. She squeezed it so tightly, like she was holding on to her own life. And maybe she was. She didn't look at me during the procedure. She couldn't. But her hand in mine was all I needed. All I could give her. Afterward, she cried, like a flood had broken through a dam. I didn't know how to comfort her. I just held her. I held her the way I wished I could have held her 2 months ago when this nightmare first began. The hardest part was not watching her go through the procedure, but seeing her afterward. Seeing her broken, empty, yet somehow lighter. She smiled weakly at me. We'll be okay, she whispered. We will, I agreed. But even as I said the words, I knew things would never be the same between us. There was too much hurt, too much pain buried beneath the surface. The trust, the connection we had once shared, had fractured beyond repair. The day after the procedure, Emily was quiet, almost too quiet. We'd spent the evening curled up in bed, the space between us stretching further than it ever had before. I could tell she was still processing everything. The abortion had been her choice, but the guilt didn't just vanish. It lingered, thick and heavy, in the air between us. She'd said the right things, the things that made me believe she was starting to find peace. But there was a part of me that feared it was a facade. That the scars, the trauma of everything, would never truly fade. The phone call with her mother had only made things worse, twisting her insides even more. I couldn't imagine the kind of weight she carried, the relentless tug-of-war between love for her family and her desire to reclaim her own life. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later, when Emily's mother called. I could hear the tension in Emily's voice even before she handed me the phone. "Just don't make things worse," Emily whispered, her eyes pleading. I took the phone from her, trying to steady my breathing, trying to brace myself for the words that would undoubtedly come. "Hello," I said, my voice strained. The voice on the other end was cold, sharp, a woman who had made her opinions known long before today. "You did this to her," she spat, venom in every syllable. "You've manipulated her, destroyed her. And now, you've taken away her soul. I'll never forgive you for what you've done." My stomach twisted. I could feel my fists clenching, the rage building deep in my chest. "This wasn't my choice, and you know it. Don't you dare put this on me." "You've already poisoned her mind," she continued, her tone becoming more frantic. "She's broken, and it's because of you. She'll never be the same again." I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding in my ears. "She's already broken," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "I'm just trying to help her put the pieces back together." The phone call ended in silence, her mother's curses lingering in the air like smoke. When I handed the phone back to Emily, I saw the emptiness in her eyes. She didn't need to say anything for me to know what she was feeling. Her mother had always been her anchor, her rock, and now it felt like she was slipping away, piece by piece. That night, Emily lay beside me, her body stiff and distant. I tried to touch her, comfort her, but she pulled away. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't keep doing this to you. I'm a mess." "You're not a mess," I said softly, kissing the top of her head. "You're hurt. You're healing. And you don't have to do this alone." But the cracks were already starting to form. Every word I said seemed to bounce off her, unable to penetrate the wall she'd begun to build around herself. And I knew that deep down, no matter how much I wanted to help, she was going to have to face this battle on her own. It had been 3 weeks since the abortion. Emily had kept her distance, not just physically, but emotionally too. The silence between us was unbearable, but I didn't know how to bridge the gap anymore. And then, one evening, I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing in front of me. Their faces were stern, unreadable. "We're here to speak with Emily," one of them said. I felt a sharp pang of panic in my chest. "What's this about?" I demanded. The officer didn't respond, just motioned for me to step aside. My heart was racing as I led them to the living room, where Emily was sitting, pale and still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The officer who had been questioning me took a seat across from her, asking her a series of calm, almost routine questions. But the tension in the room was suffocating. My mind raced. What was going on? Why were they here? After a while, the other officer finished speaking with Emily, and they both stood to leave. The moment the door closed behind them, Emily's face crumpled. She didn't even try to hide it. "They said I was in danger," she whispered, voice shaking. "They said I was being hurt, that I was being abused." I froze. "What?" I asked, horrified. "Who said that? Who called the police?" "My mother," she said, barely above a whisper. The anger that flooded through me was volcanic. I could feel it rising, a white-hot fury I had never felt before. She'd called the police on me? She'd painted me as an abuser? The person who had been there for her when no one else was? I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, to make her understand how wrong this was. But Emily was already crumbling again, already broken by her mother's betrayal. "I can't believe she did this," I said, my voice barely controlled. I don't know what to do," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's my mother. She's all I've ever known. But now, I don't know who she is anymore." "I won't let her do this to you," I said, my voice cold, determined. "If she ever pulls anything like that again, I'm pressing charges." "No," Emily pleaded, her voice desperate. "Please don't do that. It'll only make things worse. I just need time." I nodded, though a part of me felt like I was losing her in a way I couldn't get back. She had to cut ties with her mother. She had to see that this wasn't love, it was manipulation. But I knew she wasn't ready to make that choice yet. She was still too attached, still too afraid of the void her mother had left. That night, we lay in silence again. She wasn't crying anymore, but I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her. I had to wonder if she would ever be the same. If I would ever be the same. It had been weeks since that phone call with her mother, and I could feel Emily slipping further away from me. Every day was a struggle to keep the connection we once had, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. The harder I tried, the more it slipped through my fingers. And then came the phone call I had been dreading. I was sitting at home, trying to focus on work, when Emily came in, her eyes red, her face blotchy from crying. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I already knew. I already felt it in my bones. "Emily," I started, but she cut me off. I think it's over. I think I'm done." The words hit me like a slap across the face. "Number Emily, please," I begged. "Don't do this. We can get through this. I know we can." But she shook her head. "I can't do this anymore. I'm not who I was before all of this. And neither are you. We've changed. We're not the same people. And I'm not sure we can ever go back." I felt the tears start to sting my eyes, but I fought them back. "Please don't do this. Please, don't leave me." But she already had. Her eyes softened, filled with pain, and she reached for my hand. But even as she held it, I knew. We were done. And maybe we'd been done for a long time. The events we'd gone through, the trauma, the guilt, the fallout with her family, it had all torn us apart, piece by piece. "I'll always love you," she whispered. "But we've both changed too much to stay together." And just like that, she was gone. It's strange, the way a relationship can feel so alive one moment and then, like a candle snuffed out, leave behind only the faintest trace of warmth. I tried to tell myself that I'd be okay. That I'd get over it, move on. Hell, I'd been through worse in my life. But losing Emily felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and with every step, I was falling into an abyss of grief I couldn't escape. The apartment felt emptier now, even though she had barely been around in the last few weeks. The silence after she left was suffocating. There were no more late-night talks, no more her laughter filling the space, no more her scent lingering on the pillow next to mine. And despite what I told myself about moving on, about being strong, her absence was impossible to ignore. I threw myself into work, buried myself in distractions, but the ache never really left. There was a hole inside me, a hollow space where Emily had been, and nothing seemed capable of filling it. The first few days after she left, I stayed in bed. Just sat there, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. I knew what had happened, of course. She had chosen her family over me. And I couldn't blame her for that. I couldn't blame her for needing her mother, for clinging to what little thread of stability she had left. But it didn't stop the pain. It didn't stop the loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. I was angry, too. Angry at her mother, angry at myself, at the situation. But mostly, I was angry at the world. How could something like this happen? How could two people who loved each other so much end up so broken? Then, one night, after a long day of pretending I was fine, I received a message. It was from Emily. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was a mistake. I'd already let go, hadn't I? I'd already accepted that we were done. But my finger hovered over the screen, and before I could stop myself, I clicked it. "I miss you. I miss us." That was it. A short, simple message. But it hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at it for a long time, reading it over and over again, my heart hammering in my chest. She missed me. She missed us. But what did that mean? Was she asking for another chance? Or was it just a fleeting moment of weakness? A moment where she thought she could somehow undo everything that had happened? I didn't know what to do. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure of what to say, unsure of what I even wanted to hear from her. The truth was, I wanted her back. But I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to put myself through that again. I didn't reply right away. I let the silence stretch between us, a painful reminder of everything we had lost. Days turned into weeks. Emily didn't reach out again. She didn't have to. I knew she needed space to heal, just like I did. But it didn't stop the ache. Every time I saw a couple walking hand in hand or heard a song that reminded me of her, it was like a sharp needle being driven through my chest. I had lost her, and in the process, I'd lost a part of myself. I tried to get back to a routine, I called friends, I went out. But nothing felt the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just going through the motions, living a life that wasn't mine. I missed Emily, but I also missed the version of me I had been when I was with her. The man who had been strong, who had cared for someone, who had loved without hesitation. I started going to therapy on my own. I didn't think I needed it at first. I thought I was fine. I thought I could handle this alone. But talking to a stranger, someone who didn't judge, someone who just listened, helped more than I could have imagined. Slowly, I started to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting her. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and learning to live with it. I began to see that no matter how much I loved her, no matter how badly I wanted to fix everything, we were two broken people, trying to make sense of a tragedy that neither of us had asked for. Maybe, in the end, it was just too much to ask of each other. Maybe we weren't meant to survive this? But the most important thing I learned was this. It wasn't my job to fix her. And it wasn't her job to fix me. We both needed to heal on our own terms. And sometimes, that meant walking away. One afternoon, a month after everything fell apart, I saw Emily again. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know what I'd say, what I'd feel. She was standing in the coffee shop I always went to, looking the same and yet completely different. Her face was softer now, less weighed down by the hurt. Her eyes, though still shadowed by grief, held something else, something like hope. She saw me too. Her eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, there was that familiar spark. That old connection. But then, she looked away, her lips trembling. I walked up to her, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to bridge the gap between us. She smiled weakly when I approached, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in our old world, the one where things made sense. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything. For all of it." I didn't know what to say. There was nothing left to say. "You don't have to apologize," I replied, my voice tight. "We've both been through too much." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, each of us carrying the weight of everything that had happened. There was no anger between us anymore, no resentment. Just an understanding. An understanding that we couldn't go back, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. I think I'll be okay," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine. I nodded. "Yeah. Me too." And just like that, it was over. We didn't need to say anything more. We had our closure. Life moves on, even when it feels impossible. In time, Emily and I drifted apart. We both moved to different places, found different people, and built new lives. I never stopped loving her. But I learned that love isn't always enough to hold two people together, especially when life has torn them apart in ways that can't be healed. Sometimes, letting go is the hardest thing you can do. But sometimes, it's the only thing that can save you. As for Emily, I hope she finds peace. I hope she finds happiness, the kind she deserves. I don't know where she is now, but I'll always carry her with me. She will always be a part of my story, a chapter I can't erase. And maybe that's the way it should be.